Ride to Hell, Retribution. Oh my god, this game sucks. Let me give you the reasons why this game sucks. Poor first impression. The game opens with Jake using a turret, driving his motorcycle, and getting into a QTE fistfight. The whole sequence jumps back and forth, has no setup and shows a cutscene. Jake kills Colt, see wire number 17, that was spoiled later in the game. Numerous bugs and glitches, that is Jake will occasionally walk upside down. They become worse in vehicle sections where parts of the scenery disappear, your bike appearing outside barriers, suddenly warping forward and falling through the road into limbo. The story itself is extremely poor and basic. It basically boils down to kill the next gang member, and every single time, the gang member flees to 2 or 3 new hideouts to shamelessly pad out the game. Because of the drawn-out mission structure, the game is roughly 12 hours long for a single playthrough on badass biker difficulty, twice as long as your average crappy game. The main characters are all unlikable and completely moronic. For example, Mikey spent hours wearing the very clearly labeled Retribution jacket and Mac never told him to take it off despite being fully aware that the Devil's Hand gang controlled the area. Speaking of the characters, many of them are generic and unlikable, being nothing more than just stereotypes such as the women, who are either damsels in distress or in some cases strippers, Carlos the hippie, who just so happens to be a drug dealer, and the biker gang characters themselves, including Jake, the game's protagonist. Outdated graphics, despite running on Unreal Engine 3, with ugly depth of field effect and oversaturated colors, though you can disable them by editing the config file, with some horrendous texture pop-in that make the game look even worse. The console versions also suffer from frame rate issues. Keep in mind, this game was supposed to release in 2009. Interestingly enough, DX discovered that by going through the game's ND files, he was able to drastically change how the game looks just by adjusting a couple things like removing oversaturated colors, obnoxious bloom, readjusting the FOV, and even changing the bike's handling, making it a lot smoother to drive. The changes are so drastic that it made the game look like it actually might have come out in 2013. Lazy and puppet-like character animations. No character has any real face animation, with one of the worst facial animations in the gaming history. Jake's actions in the game make him a borderline criminal. The voice acting and dialogue are extremely poor. To quote Angry Joe, "It's as if the lines were recorded in the bathroom of the studio by unpaid interns." And DX, the voice acting was recorded via tin can walkie-talkies. The most infamous line is spoken by Carlos, "Oh sucky sucky, oh wow." The PC version itself was simply a console port of the 360 version, making the PC version one of the worst PC ports of all time. As a result, there were no video settings to change the game's resolution. Thankfully, it can be set in the game's config file, and graphics settings to get rid of the game's horrible texture pop-ups. Also, the horrible control scheme, which involves pressing F112 to scroll through the menu, among other things, for the PC port can't be remapped. Poor and unfinished sound design and audio mixing. Many cutscenes are dead silent other than the characters' voices and inconsistent sound effects. The conversation between Jake and Mikey on a bike was a prime example of this. Awkward and disjointed cutscenes. For example, when Colt saw Mikey wearing the vest, the game jumps to Jake and Mikey being pursued by the Devil's Hand bikers. After the pursuit section, it jumps to them got cornered by the bikers without any transition. The game randomly freezes, crashes. Misogynistic tone. Women in the game exist only to be rescued and to reward Jake with sex and cutscenes immediately after with no transition. These cutscenes are infamous for their hilariously poor animation. The character models clip through each other and look emotionless. See number 4. As well as the fact that they remain fully clothed throughout instead of being nude while dry humping each other. The game is also insulting to bikers as they are portrayed as idiots and rapists who kill people because they don't like them. Many of the enemies you kill have nothing to do with the Devil's Hand, that is cops, truckers. There are 37 missions which are criticized for being boring and repetitive, and the game does such a poor job at telling you objectives. In the mission where Colt is the level's boss, The screen shows the text "All enemies are dead" while Colt is firing from a machine gun turret. Linear environments. The game was originally supposed to be open world, but due to the terrible development they had to make do with what they had and instead made every driving section go from point A to point B. There are invisible walls that write "wrong way, turn back now" and prevent you from exploring areas beyond when moving around outdoors, possibly due to the game being hugely rushed. Sloppy driving physics. Your bike steers like it's riding on ice. You can drift almost indefinitely, and on gamepads, the speed boost is mapped to the left thumbstick by pushing it forward. Your bike also stops still when hitting traffic at full speed. Extremely poor enemy aid. Enemies don't take cover. When they do, they still leave their heads poking out for an easy headshot. And melee enemies will opt to just boom rush you in shooting sections as well as get stuck on walls and shoot in random directions. Sometimes they ignore you completely. Enemies are bullet sponges that take forever to kill unless you headshot them. To make matters worse, some enemies wear hockey masks that make them immune to headshots because plastic masks are somehow bulletproof. Ear-bleedingly awful and repetitive soundtrack, with the exception of Rival Sun's Pressure and Time that plays in the intro and main menu. Melee combat is so basic and broken that you can easily exploit by spamming the block-breaking kick, and occasionally Jake goes into rage mode where it becomes QTE fistfights. You can actually beat me 8-hook with this method. For some reason enemies can block sharp melee weapon attacks, making the combat even more unrealistic and frustrating. The camera is poorly positioned to where Jake is. He will always be at the left of the screen. Shooting is also broken due to the stiff aiming and jerky camera, plus enemies don't react to being shot at all unless you shoot them in the head, which is an instant kill and makes the game go into bullet time whenever you get a headshot. Oh, and blind firing is also broken to the point of being unusable since it has no accuracy at all. This gets much worse in the PC version. Even if you set the sensibility to the lowest value possible, the aiming will still feel stiff and slippery, and for some reason the aiming will get even more slippery when you're aiming at an enemy, as if the game doesn't want you to shoot accurately. The only challenge in the driving sections is to not crash, and you are not allowed to turn back. Otherwise, the game forcefully restarts you at a checkpoint on road. It has some of the worst driving and shooting stages ever made. During these stages, Jake drives in slow motion and must shoot an enemy biker until he dies. Because of the game's rushed and buggy design, even if you kill them, they can still drive and not crash for a time while Jake is still in slow motion, dragging the game on further than it needs. Motorcycle combat is repetitive because every enemy does the same thing. Drive up beside you, initiate a QTE, you kill them and shove them off the bike, causing the bike to fly off to the side and explode with the same animation and sound every time. These sections also have rage attacks, but good luck if you ever get a prompt for one. Whenever you make a mistake 3 times in the bike sections, the bike careens off to the right and explodes for no reason instead of just showing Jake falling off the bike, probably because they had no time to make animations for it. Lazy and copy-pasted character models. The prostitutes and low-level enemies in the game all reuse the same handful of models. Stupid and drawn-out level design. In one instance, Jake must deactivate an electric fence that he needs to climb over. To do this, he steals a truck after killing some innocent truckers, drives miles away to the power plant while killing cops, kills all the workers there, shoots the truck from a distance away and blows up the entire plant. All that just to deactivate an electric fence. Speaking of that, in the aircraft graveyard section there are a lot of scrapped Boeing 727s and Lockheed L-1011s. At the time the game was set, 1969, the first plane was brand new. It was introduced in 1964, and the second hadn't been invented yet, making it anachronical. Has a DLC expansion, named Cook's Mad Recipe, that is worse than the vanilla game. The DLC adds nothing to the game besides an almost useless sniper rifle with a horrible cross. The controls are completely inverted, causing the player to walk upside down. While there are things to collect like bike parts and paints, you can't unlock everything unless you play on 1% difficulty. which requires you to beat the game once beforehand to unlock. That means you have to suffer through this mess of a game twice if you want to unlock everything. If you try to open the achievements option in the PC version, it will show nothing and the controls will stop working, forcing you to close the game with the task manager. This is probably caused because the achievements option was originally intended to open the Steam game achievements. Towards the end of the game, there is an awful racing stage in which Jake must get first place to continue. Due to the broken and slippery driving controls, this section is extremely unreasonably difficult. Some enemies towards the end of the game throw dynamite at Jake. The blast radius of the dynamite is highlighted by a red circle, but it is actually much larger than the circle states. On top of that, when Jake is caught by the blast, he either becomes stunned for an extended period of time, allowing enemies to shoot him without the player being able to defend themselves, or he simply dies instantly, forcing the player to restart from a checkpoint. Terrible final boss fight in which the boss hurls insta-kill weapons like dynamite at Jake in a lazy attempt to make the game more challenging. On some loading screens, the game tells you that killing civilians will cause the player to attract the authorities. But the only civilians in the game are in dead end and these civilians are invincible. Shooting them does absolutely nothing, proving once again that the game was rushed, and those are all the reasons why this game sucks. Do you know who hates this game? Everyone in the entire world. They think this game is one of the worst. I agree with them. So screw Ride to Hell, Retribution, and screw Superman 64, Horizon 2. Forbidden West is 680,000 times better than Ride to Hell, Retribution. End of rant.